miss this beautiful, very good event actually.
Absolutely.
Hello, Dr. Sarat.
Hi, sir. Brandon, sir. How are you?
Sir, good
He's
evening,
not able
sir.
to hear me. I think.
Are you able to hear, sir?
We can hear PVS. We can hear
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Sarat.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Rajeswar and Sakthivel, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening,
madam.
Good
evening, sir.
Good evening, madam. Good evening. Good evening. Good to have KK back. After, last time also
Yes.
you were there, right?
Sorry?
Yeah. You were there for the last event also, right?
Yeah, I was there. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Very good, sir.
Okay. Mr. Rajeshwar, shall we start? It's 2 minutes past 6.
Sure. At
Yeah.
least
I mean,
we
I will
have,
make the introduction. I will. Dr. Akila will introduce, and then I will introduce the topic and yourself. Then we will hand it over to you, sir. And that will be followed by question and answers, which will be managed by Dr. Sakthivel. And then we will throw the floor to for discussions if you have time.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Dr. Akila, you want to just kickstart and start recording?
Yes, sir. I started recording, sir.
Okay. Then let me start. Good evening, everyone. On this beautiful evening of 8th October 22, Saturday, at Chennai, when it's neither raining and at the same time we have a very cool temperature in Chennai. So I welcome you all on behalf of Computer Society of India, Chennai chapter, IEEE Computer Society Madras, Association for Computing Machinery, Chennai, and the Society for Electronic Transactions and Security. So we welcome all the office bearers and the members of all these societies, and specifically Dr. Sakthivel and Mr. Mohan, who is not here, and Dr. Sarat for taking this call. Could we go on mute, please?
Okay.
Dr. Akila, could you just advise people to go on mute?
I
Or you
request
can-
all the participants to kindly mute your mic.
Okay.
Akila, can you mute the speaker? I mean,
Yes, sir.
wherever. Yeah. So I welcome you all for this wonderful meeting.
Sir, Sakthivel sir has to mute now.
Yes, thank you. In this world today, people are, as we all know, in general, resistant to change. Having been in IT, all of us know that resistance to change has been one of the huge challenges in any system implementation or digitization, right? As we call it today. Fortunately or unfortunately, COVID pandemic has been a great change agent in the entire world, and it has driven the whole of the world towards digitization or online communication. And some of the activities which we never thought were possible using online or remote communication, I think it has opened the entire world, right? Today, a common man, the man on the road, the layman, they all know what online means, what remote meetings mean. So this is the complete dream of digitization of a proper IT expert. But then came with it the explosion of the possible network architectures and the huge concerns around the security, right? Today, the world is open. The entire world is online and remotely connected with interconnected zones, cloud services, cloud infrastructure, connections to remote, mobile environments, and connections to hitherto not possible devices, such as IoT devices. Okay, so the entire home is connected. Today, the world is connected. It's, I mean, pretty much it is a hyper-connected world. Therefore, it becomes extremely critical to protect the identities, devices, network, and data. So the world has now woken up to zero trust architecture. Though zero trust architecture has been in the air for quite some time, I guess the term was introduced in as early as in 1944 or so. but then it became a proper conventional structure from 2010 or so. So though it has been in the air for quite some time due to the reasons we discussed earlier, it has assumed high prominence in the recent days. And ZTA concept is really simple. Never trust, always verify. It is indeed a non-believer in this world, and it is a symbol of borderless or boundaryless security. So hence it is so relevant today that we have one of the acknowledged experts in this field, Dr. Rajeswar Rao, to address this august audience today. And Mr. Rajeswar Rao is the founder of Inspiresolution and the founding co-partner of UNMITI Consultancy Services, LLP. And Mr. Rajeswar Rao is a unique combination of creativity, process compliance, and global methodologies. And this is what has helped him evolve into a firm believer of the tenet that we should inspire everyone to do things that they never thought they could do. And challenging the status quo has always been one of his greatest strengths, and he has been awarded over the past 3 decades of progressive management of various awards, global technology and business awards. And he has worked in several organizations at CXO levels across various geographies and cultures. And Mr. Rao's unique ability to articulate the strength of core values, vision, and purpose of an institution at the C level have helped him build large technology and IT services businesses that have created consistent, significant shareholder value. Mr. Rajeswar brings in diverse and deep experience and expertise in global strategy, design thinking, balanced scorecard, enterprise business excellence. Baldrige is one example, EFQM, CIIXM, leadership and mentorship and whatnot. So setting up frameworks for achieving the sustained leadership has been his strength. Mr. Rao, for the past 5 years, has trained about 200 plus independent directors on strategy and balanced scorecard, and been associated with multiple Ivy League firms to train and mentor their senior and middle management teams on strategy, change management, entrepreneurship, and leadership. Mr. Rajeswar has over 33 years of IT experience spanning 4 generations of technology and business transformation, and well respected for his forthright views, untarnished reputation for being value-driven, well-grounded to values, and a man who has always walked the talk on his principles and commitment. And in his journey, he has groomed so many future leaders in the organizations he is associated with. And Mr. Rao has won multiple chairman award for delivery, client and employee excellence, and was also the top 1% future leaders identified across Infosys. So we are privileged and honored, sir, to have you as a speaker to this august audience today. I'm sure we'll all have a wonderful, very enlightening evening today. Thank you for agreeing to deliver this address, sir. Over to you, please. Mr. Rajeswar.
Thank you very much, Mr. KK, and the CSI, the IEEE, and the ACM chapters of Chennai. It has always been my great pleasure associating with these bodies for the last decade or so. And I think I should thank Mr. Mohan for giving me this opportunity of sharing a very, very latest and cutting edge methodologies on zero trust. So we'll take the questions at the end of the session, but the chat box and the messaging box is always open. Feel free to type your questions and we'll take it at the end of the session. I'll be sharing a presentation and will be the guiding factor for my presentation, please. Just give me a second. So, I don't know. Just give me a second. I'm not able to share my presentation for you.
Sir, it's coming up, sir. It's coming
It's
up.
coming up.
Yes, yes.
Do you see the presentation now?
No, it's it was coming up. Now we see only your picture.
Okay, just give me a second.
Yeah. It said you are presenting the.
Yeah,
It was
and
just coming up.
it went off.
Yeah, it went off. But we see another ID logged in. So I think it is still there, waiting for the PPT.
Okay, maybe there is some lag in the system. Just give me a second. Can you see the presentation, please?
Not yet. I think it's coming up. Yeah, we can see that. It's come up.
You see it? Okay.
Yes, it's come up.
How about the audio?
Yes, we can hear you.
Super.
Dr. Akhila, can you hear?
Akhila and other participants?
Yes, sir, we can hear you clearly.
I'm able to get it.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful.
We are
Thank
ready,
you.
sir. We are all set.
Thank you for the confirmation. So welcome to the session on Zero Trust Architecture, which is pretty much a blueprint to the future of network on the cyber security. Zero Trust Architecture, is all about a philosophy, is all about a way of life. And this session for the next 1 hour to 75 minutes, we'll understand what is Zero Trust and why is it important. We'll briefly touch upon how identity, device health, and trustworthiness of every participant in a network is impacted, and how the organization and the security posture of its policies and its way of life in terms of access control is managed. We'll learn the various aspects of Zero Trust, its core principles and governing principles. We'll also briefly touch upon the maturity cycle of a Zero Trust methodology, and also get aware of how and in what way Zero Trust can be deployed across the lines of businesses, either on cloud, on a SaaS applications, or on the on-premises installations. If you take at least 2 decades back, I still remember there was a communication about what are the most common security mistakes made by individuals, and in the organization where I worked, this was very much circulated. And I've picked upon one item which is called as the antivirus software, which was an absolute must during those days. But if you note, at the end of it, there was always a caution saying that keep an eye out for what is happening inside the organization. It's not necessarily that everything will come from outside, but there was always a caution that we should keep an eye on what's happening inside. How a network was set up, how institutions were managing the web. If you look at briefly about the history of the way the web technologies and the way networking worked, it was always driven by the hub and spoke model. The architecture made sense at that point in time because we all used to go to the workplace, draw a chair, log into a desktop, you get into an intranet, do your business, and walk out. And when we are walking out of the campus at the end of the day, we are walking out with nothing in our hands. Everything, the data, the network, the connections, everything was housed in-house. Everything was there in the data center, which is there in the premises. So remote locations, whether the branches, the offices, the retail stores, were directly wired to the data center, and there was a point-to-point contact. When I started my career in late 80s, when I was fortunate to work upon right from the installation of an IBM 3090 mainframe. It was a green terminal, 3070 terminals connected to the IBM 3090, and everything was done on the machine through the SNA architecture. So everybody multiplied the traditional network till the point it opened up and broken all the boundaries, and today we call it as a cloud network. Historically, the network was considered to be like a castle surrounded by a moat and with a single point entry. And the fundamental premise of that architecture was that everybody within the organization is trustworthy. Everybody who is licensed to get into the campus, log into the system with their certain credentials, they were considered to be trustworthy and zero risk. The entire risk was always from outside, and every security parameter for the network, the data, the people, everything was meant to be protected from outside in rather than from inside out. I'm sure everybody must be reminiscing this particular scene in Sholay. Once you get in, nothing can get out. Everything was found to be secured. But of late, we have seen that the biggest threat often comes from inside, not necessarily from outside. In the 2019 RSA conference on security, the data was presented that 4% of the end users will click on any malicious link which comes to their either an email or to their devices. 28% of the attacks, which were serious attacks, there was a breach which caused financial as well as reputational damage to the organizations. They came from inside the organization. That means from the employees, whether they are full-time or from the contracting employees. And 17% of the breaches had errors like casual events, and it caused havoc. And it also gotten into very, very high impact incidents like ransomware and other malware attacks. So given that context, as on today, on 8th October 22, why are we having this conversation of zero trust? And what are we protecting? If I take a brief pause and ask the question to all of you, why are we so afraid of an external attack into our network? Can I get a few answers? What are we afraid of and what are we protecting from? And what is it that the attackers are looking for? Anyone?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please go ahead. Anybody can answer.
I think Mr. Ghosh has raised a hand. Please go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Ghosh.
Yes. First of all, very good evening to all of you. And I like to say that the cyber hackers these days, due to the ISO hacking mechanism, they are very much in position to hack the system. And once they hack the system, there is a big threat in banking and finance, and OTP hacking and also password hacking is also there. System by system means if one account gets hacked, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 9 and 10 accounts can get hacked. So it's an opportunity for the hackers to, although it's an ethical hacking or unethical hacking, but ISO 27001 is also in place so that these things keep in a check.
So, I mean, people can attack, but end of the day, what is it that we are afraid of?
So
Yeah, it's monetary benefits they are getting, and also they are they are ransacking our money, through ransomware, spyware, all this, all the firewalls and are in place, but our hard-earned money is getting out from the system. That is
So
the main.
basically, what you are saying is that you lose money because the hackers, they steal money from your account,
Yes.
right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one is that there is a loss of money. Okay.
Are we
So-
afraid of the identity? I mean, loss of identity, or
Yes,
stealing of
KYC. Know your
So
customer.
what? I mean, end of the day, what are we looking at? If somebody steals my identity, so what?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
This is Sri Priya from Coimbatore. So actually, we are afraid of losing our data or informations about ourselves.
Okay, data is what we are afraid of. So is there anything else?
Data means about our database of the information.
No, I agree. Okay. I mean, end of the day, the smallest unit of loss is what you call it as data.
Yes, sir.
So it doesn't matter whether money is data
Money, yeah.
or identity is data, still people are afraid of data. Okay, so anything else?
So if you consider a cloud scenario in which we are providing some service like on-demand service or PaaS or SaaS, so if it get compromised, then that service will be suffering, and there will be business loss for that cloud provider.
So end of
So
the
it
day,
is-
business loss is also about money, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we need to protect the infrastructure like cloud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? So
breaking of our service
And-
similar to DDoS attack kind of thing, sir.
and the reputation.
reputation is risk. So what happens if the reputation is tarnished or?
We can say that we can analyze SWOT analysis, that is strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat, so that our business reputation does not get hampered, and our revenues and turnovers also intact, keep it intact.
So it's all about money, right? It all comes down to money only, right? Whether you call it reputation, firewall, data, network, identity, password. I think we all are worried about the smallest unit of loss, which is data, which can be converted into money, right?
Means money is the economy and lifestyle balance.
Yeah, it's all about money, right? So fair enough. I think there is and I was able to generate a bit of thought process on this. So if you look at it, what are we afraid of? Why do you put a lock on the door? If somebody gets into breaks into the door and walks away, I mean, what happens? They come, they look for everything. Either they find something and walk out of it, or they don't find anything and then make a mess of it and go away, right?
Yes.
So all along, we believed that the main door was secure. We had the big Godrej Navtal, maybe 2 or 3 Navtals, hoping that nobody can get it. And we trusted everybody inside, including the servant maids, including the sweepers, the gardeners, the car drivers, because they belong within the network. So we all trusted the network as the last line of safety, and anything outside that we were afraid of. But today, if you look at it, the network is broken. The walls are broken. When somebody is getting into an office, they don't necessarily come in empty-handed. They come into the campus with their own devices, or they work from home, or they are traveling. They connect through the public Wi-Fi in airports, in aircrafts, in trains. Today, the data is not necessarily stationed within the premises of the workplace. It's on the cloud. Most of the services we consume are on SaaS model. And we still the data is. The organization is not able to find out from which IP address somebody is logging into their systems. What is getting in, what is getting out, you get to know after the damage has been made. And what do the attackers do? They not only shift to identity attacks, they steal credentials, there is a phishing, end of the day, there is a loss of money, and there is an existential damage. If you look at the damage done by the attackers, it can be clubbed into 3 buckets. The attackers target the confidentiality of the network. That means, hey, I can get into the servers of the defense. Hey, I can get into the mainframe of the space organization. I can get into any network and I can break their confidentiality. So that is one form of attack. The second is not only I break the confidentiality, I can not only get into the system, I can change the identity and integrity of the system. I can manipulate the data and then create a mess out of it. The third form of attack or the damage they can do is they can even shut down the key services, which they call it as the availability of certain services, especially in the SaaS models, where they can attack and down the services and can cause huge damage, not only for that business, but for globally connected businesses. And this is exactly what has happened in the attacks recently called as the SolarWind. I don't know how many of you have gone through it. You can do the Google search. I think during the COVID-19, one of the biggest cyber attacks ever happened in the history was the SolarWinds. And the damage has been enormous, including the federal government. And a lot of government and quasi-government and private enterprises which are using the services of SolarWind. If you look at the recent cybersecurity incidents across the world during the pandemic and just before the pandemic, I think nothing was spared. Even NSA was not spared. Even SolarWind, the Colonial Pipeline, Microsoft Exchange, DNS servers. If you look at the Sony pictures, I think is one of the biggest attacks on the private network, which even raised the question about North Korea attacking the US. So the cyber security is not necessarily an individual or an enterprise problem, but has become a national security issue also. And it's extremely important that every nation, every company, every department need to relook at the way they have organized the security infrastructure for the data and their applications and the people. As it always says, never trust, always verify. If you look at the history of cybersecurity incidents, even the first incident goes back even before I was born, or many of the people on the call have born. The first mainframe way back in 1960s was compatible time sharing systems or whatever. I think that number 1 and 2. They faced the first attack of integrity and availability. This chart gives you a clear picture about various major attacks on cyber security and what was the loss all along, including what happened in the SolarWinds. The color codes clearly says that in some cases availability was down, in certain cases integrity and availability was compromised. In most of the cases, it's the confidentiality of the data was under compromise. When you talk about the confidentiality of the data, it's always the human-centric data, which is your biometrics, your account numbers, your passwords. Something is very, very personal to the users, to the end users. If that is compromised, then everything else is lost in the business. And most of the cases, how it happened was that there has been an exploitation of the privileges and the access controls, including the devices. Everything was compromised and data was lost. This is the background under which we are today. Though the traditional models of security are no more valid, or they are no more good enough to secure the businesses and the work we do, including the academic institutions. Certain institutions which do some fundamental research, some cutting edge research, they probably are leading the market. Imagine so much of data is getting in and getting out. People and students, they come with their own devices. On an average, every student who's getting into a campus is having at least 2 or 3 devices. One laptop, one smartphone, and a smartwatch. That's minimum. And how much of holes is being plugged on the network security causes a significant relook at the way we are organized today in terms of what do we secure and how do we secure. If you look at the data in terms of what have been the breaches, 81% have been stolen or weak passwords. I don't know how many of us in this call, we actually have a habit of changing the passwords every 45 days to 90 days. We don't. How many of us write down a password on a diary just because we forget? The other day I was just calculating, if I take the number of user IDs and passwords across all platforms, right from the Netflix to Amazon Prime to Sun News to my bank to what, there are 32 unique passwords at any point in time I use and 19 user IDs. Do I change all of these every 45 days and 90 days? No. Sometimes I get so fed up of trying to be innovative on how many unique passwords I create. I create a clone of one password, and within a month or so, I find that one of my IDs has been breached. So it's very important to ensure that we are so connected in this connected world. We need to follow a certain discipline, and the system should impose that discipline on how do we manage our own personal data. 96% of the time, the penetration testers identified at least one in production vulnerability. Whether it is a tunnel violation, whether it's an IP port violation, or it could be any violation. So, it's something which is, the system has become so fragile. Once it was considered to be a very, very strong system, today is considered to be extremely fragile, and anything we store on the net, it's tagged as very weak. And it all happened because of the cloud. Because today, it is anytime, anywhere, by anyone. It's extremely important to protect our identity and the data right through the journey. There's no physical boundary or physical network possible anywhere.
Sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. I have a question that related to password hacking. What should we do? Because every now and then I change my password related to civil score or internet banking or any other like Google passwords. I see or get a sound related to password hacking, and people say that it is quite natural and government does not believe the people. So it's a governance thing that the password get hacked, and we should not complain in related to these things. So how to negotiate with these things?
Yeah, we'll answer that. Just I have noted your question. We will take the questions at the end of the presentation. So this anytime, anywhere consumption is actually raised a big question mark on the way we are organized in terms of risks, in terms of the impact of the risk, and in terms of the entire orchestration of the policies we have in terms, whether it's on the device or the people or even the access controls. And more often, the threats are within. Say, for example, there is a link which comes to an email server. Somebody who has been an employee for the last 20 years, by mistake, clicks that link. The attacker has an access into your system through your device and any other device connected to the network on which you are connected, because the entire network is connected within the DMZ and all you have is a network switch. So the malicious code finds a vulnerability and it multiplies within a matter of milliseconds across the network. And suddenly you find that the entire section of the network is compromised. So this is where, we have to look at or relook at the way the data is organized in a hyper-connected world. The traditional hub and spoke is not going to work, and that's the end of history. Today, if we were to look back and say, what is the most seminal moment in terms of the network security and the way the cloud and the other architectures are functioning, I think the time is now where the zero trust redefines the entire security infrastructure and architecture for network access and application access. It's in the first time in the history of the computing world, I would say that the world is seeing a significant change, a shift. Rather than it is actually redoing its entire network, application, and access frameworks all over again. And this slide, talks about the journey where even though it was there in some form or other, but it was the COVID and the pandemic and the number of hits and the attacks which accelerated during these periods has brought that subject say, hey, it has to be done now or never. We are going to lose big time if we don't do it today. Forrester has already predicted that. You're already attacked, but you don't know. We still don't know that how much of our confidentiality or integrity or availability of the systems are already compromised. We will get to know only if we start looking at the damage it has created. But we still don't know how much of data has already gone out of your system. Have we stopped trusting our own, or we still believe that, hey, this employee has been here for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. The employee can't just go wrong. The fact that today everything is now being resetted. I'll come back to this and say, we are getting into the world where the world is all about without any passwords. There are other means to identify and get you the access to what you deserve to get access. And it's all about redefining the network and the identity management. This is where the zero trust comes into play. The whole monolithic Castle Rock systems of the past are now broken. They're getting more and more granular, and everything you do is being tracked and monitored in the new parlance of zero trust. And how do we do it? Not at the data level or at the infrastructure level, not at the network level, but it's applicable across all the entities, right from identifying you, right up to the data. Just because you're an employee for the last 25 years, tomorrow when you swipe in, it's not necessary that you have to be given access. It has to be validated and verified every time and all the time. Because the fundamental principles of zero trust is that there is already a breach and I have to be careful. It's not that I'm suspecting the individual or the employee or the user, but the principles of zero trust is that every time you interact with the system, you need to identify yourself. It's like this, whenever you go to the temple and you do an archana, you all talk about your gotra and read. It's not that, you can tell the pujari, hey, I told you yesterday, why you're asking me again? You have to reassume, you have to recalibrate at every instance of interaction, because the fundamental principles that there is already a breach and you have to identify yourself. Never trust and always verify is of course the driving principle. The third and extremely more important element of zero trust behavior and architecture is micro-segmentation, which is exactly opposite to what was done all along, where everything was put behind the DMZ and say, hey, we don't want to segment because we want it to be monolithic. That's easy to guard and easy to safeguard. So some of the old principles are being challenged and are being rewritten. And what is also adding is the today availability of technology, especially the use of AI and ML. The systems are able to generate real-time intelligence and analytics to prove that you are what you are and you get what you get at any point in time. This slide is from the MIT lab, from the Lincoln Labs, which is the federal government's DoD, the only largest non-profit lab outside the DoD. They have taken the leap of faith to redefine the security infrastructure of the United States defense, and probably the one biggest seminal initiative across the world. They have done it. And they have come up with their own definitions of zero trust and zero trust architectures. Zero trust is a set of principles. It's not about technology. It's not about the components. It's about the philosophy and the way of life that treats every component, every service, every user as a point of threat. No, it's like this, you go out. I think we have gone to other extreme during COVID. We started even washing vegetables and everything, right? Because we don't know where the virus was lying. So similarly, zero trust is I just don't trust anything which comes in and goes out. Fundamentally, I'm under the belief that it's already compromised by a malicious adversary. It can be data, it can be reputation, it can be availability of the service, anything. So what does the zero trust architecture applies this principle is, it always, at every instance, does these 6 things always. You log off a system and log in, it will continue to ask for a multi-factor authentication. You have to give in multi-factor authentication every time you log in. Even though you can say, hey, I've been sitting on this chair and, looking at the terminal for the last 4 hours. Why is it that it's asking for a multi-factor authentication every time I log in? That is zero trust architecture. Then access control, resource protection, the policies on orchestration, monitoring and analytics. Today there is so much of convergence of technology. If I log in from an iPhone, I go to an iPad, there is a continuity of my single sign-on. But again, I have to identify all over again. So there is a continuous operations. My mailbox is, is flooded with a lot of emails saying that that I have logged in from this device at this time from this IP address. And every time I have to say, yes, it's me, yes, it is me, yes, it is me. Because the systems have become hypersensitive, they are very, very cautious about it. National Institute of Standards, the first ever seminal paper which has come out on the global standards on zero trust, it says that zero trust is a collection of concepts and ideas. It's an enterprise cybersecurity architecture which talks about how do you define trust, how do you define concepts, and how do you build it as a part of your DNA. It might cause a certain HR factors and say, hey, why is it that I'm going through all this? But I've been in the system for the last 20 years. I can give you sufficient examples of large organizations where some of the senior most people of the organization have leaked data to the press when the organizations was not doing well. There are a lot of external scrutiny on the organization, but mind you, some of the senior most employees have leaked data to the public domain. So this calls for relooking at the way we define the structure. So finally, when we trust, there are only three components of the trust. The first is workforce, the individual behind it. Do we trust? Yes or no? Second, workplace. When I say workplace, it's the device, it's the IP address, it's the location, it's the context. The context changes. The role-based, location-based, geo-based, everything matters in terms of workplace. Finally, the workload means what application am I accessing? Yesterday, I have access the system. Today, when I log in, I don't have an access because I have to redefine the need and the necessity. Why am I accessing what and for how long and for what purpose? The components of the zero trust system, which is driven by the people, the workload, and the workplace, is further divided into the automation and the analytics. The heart of the everything is we want to protect data, which is the smallest unit and is the most smallest component of the microsegmentation of the network. And how do I do it? It can't be done manually. It can't be done humanly. It has to be done through sophisticated technologies and automation with the real-time orchestration of the policies. The policies which are today will not be applicable tomorrow. I'll give an example. Say, for example, I have just logged into a system applying for certain approvals. I take the flight. I land into a place after 2 hours and I log into the system from another IP. The policies and the orchestration is so designed that the system is going to throw up and say, hey, this particular device, this particular individual logged in from a certain IP address 4 hours back. Why is the person logging from some other location with a different IP address? So there has to be a system which should either allow or not allow that particular individual to get in. Even if I get in, even if the individual gets in, do I get the access? And what element of access I should get? Do I need to get access to write, delete, modify, download, not download, read access, no read access? Everything is part of the orchestration. So all along, this was partially done by using software-defined protocols and VPN. But today, zero trust goes much beyond that. And it questions everything and every activity which they find it different than what it was done previously. So trust is a trust. Again, I'll come back to the question. Why are we doing this? It's extremely important that the trust has to be reposed and redefined at every instance an individual interacts with the system. It's like, you go out, buy some vegetables and come back. You have to redefine your own access into your own home. Tell that, this is me coming back. So shift has happened. It is in the process. And how is it being happened? Everything is under question and everything is being redefined. So the principles are simple. Verify explicitly. Today we have means beyond passwords to show that you are what you are. Your password will not say that you are what you are. Your password is already stolen. You could be logging in from your kid's laptop or your wife's desktop or somebody else's device, your closest friend for the last 40 years. You could be logging in from the device. Arey yaar, humko 2 minutes chahiye. I need 2 minutes. Oh, I need to give an approval. Somebody is just breathing down my neck. No. Always authenticate and always authorized on all data points, including identity, location, device, health, classification of data. Is there anything anomaly going through? It's as if you are a new guy trying to get into a system. You will start off with the least privilege access every time you log into the system or every time you interact with the system. There's always a risk-based, dynamic, real-time, adaptive policies. The heart of it is to protect data without any question. Fundamentally, they treat every login to the system as a breach. It's up to the system to say that you are not a breach rather than saying, I allowed you on trust. Later on, I realized that something else has happened. There's no later on. It's all about right at the gate, even before you get into the gate. So how do you control the strategy? You make an informed decision about the device. So every device you interact with your system, it has to be registered with the system. You cannot use any system which is not registered with the enterprise. Just because you have a user ID and a login, you cannot log in. It has to be multi-factor authentication. There is a behavior analytics. And if required, they'll get to further into, depending upon the role and the criticality of data you're interacting, they can even go to an extent of biometric identification, including your iris, your DNA scans and anything, your fingerprint. Because even today, I can still breach your fingerprint and iris scans. If you go to very, very high secure applications where the criticality of data is very confidential, high on integrity and high on availability, you can go to any extent before you get access. There are a lot of policies to be done to allow your access. It's based on the decision support system, what you have. And when I show the architecture layout, you will find that, all the hardware devices are now replaced with policies and orchestrated devices. And of course, you need to define the policies to make ensure that, what happened yesterday doesn't happen to tomorrow. So there are a lot of signals which are coming in, which shows that everything is a potential threat. And the robustness of your zero trust architecture is dependent upon only one component. How small you can go into micro-segmentation of your application stack, your data stack, and your user stack. If you look at the 3 principles of the user, the workload, and the device, the smallest the component, it's easier to identify and manage it rather than realizing it later. So it's all about micro-segmentation and how you can connect those micro segments to the, without any impacting to the business and the continuity of the business. If you look at the Microsoft solution, which I just picked it up, there is a huge user entity behavior analysis. They actually see a pattern of about your logins over the last 1 month, 6 months, 1 day, week. It all depends upon how criticality is your role and the data you access. They actually come up with a lot of patterns to say, based on your behavior analysis, based on the pattern of your access of data, you are a risk or you are not a risk. And you are tagged accordingly on the threat perception, and your access control, your device control, everything is managed based on those analytics. So it's become a very, very sophisticated, methodology now. And every organization, to me, is getting little hyper paranoid about it, but it's worth it. Because today technology is available to implement some of these hyper paranoid behaviors. At least, it can save the data and the risks rather than realizing and repenting later. I'll give one small example. How do I make a conditional access? Say, for example, today, I'm logging into a system. I can be an employee or a partner or a contractor or could be a vendor. I'm logging in using a Google ID or Microsoft authentication or federated orchestration or any other identity provider using, today you have a lot of, app-based authenticators, where you have a dual and a multifunction authenticator. You give a code and you get it. That is one way of logging in. But is that good enough? No. Then the system will also identify, from which device I'm logging in. Is it an Android mobile phone or a smartphone from an Apple? Is it an MacBook or a Windows laptop, desktop? Is it registered in the system or not? Or am I using a non-registered device? Am I logging in within the DMZ? Am I logging in within the corporate network, or am I logging in remotely? What is the regularly used IP address I'm always using? Geolocation. Today most of the laptop, they don't allow you to change any of the BIOS or any of the hardened parameters, including the geolocation. Because the geolocation tagging is extremely important to identify that you're always, especially from people working from home and remote logins, you need to be consistent with from where you log in and which device you log in. So physical and virtual locations are also important, and they have to be registered with the system. And finally, the system also identified how are you logging in? Are you using any browser apps, which are regular browser apps? Because every organization, when they issue a laptop that's hardened, they install a certain software and you're not supposed to be doing anything else other than using them. If the organization has said, you can only use a browser X or a browser Y, you can't use a browser Z. So everything has to be registered within the system, and the authentication identifies that and allows you. So how was the authentication done? There is a machine learning engine with the rules and the policies, constantly updating it, including the organizational policies and including your own behavior for the last few logins. Then the most appropriate policy is applied to your login. And a real-time evaluation engine is constantly running as a backend process, and a session is established for you. That means you are allowed to log into a particular application or a session for 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. It cannot be indefinite. So what are the controls I'm applying in that entire login process or the access control? I can allow or block your access. I can limit your access. Say, for example, out of the 1, 2, 3, 4 sources of conditions, you are qualified for 3. but the fourth one, for whatever the reason, you're not able to qualify. I can still give you access, but it's a limited access. I can randomly define and redefine your requirement for a multifunction authentication. Sometimes what happens is I'll force you to change the password just to ensure that you are what you are and who are what you are. And I can, definitely block the legacy authentication and say, hey, you're barred from logging into this application for the next 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 month, 6 months, whatever it is. So if you look at the zero trust-based access control, it is way different than what is being done for the last 20 years. So everything is being monitored and tracked and allowed. And finally, once you cross these gates, you are allowed to access the applications, which could be on the public cloud or SaaS clouds or the hybrid clouds or on the on-premise apps. And every time you log in and log off, you have to go through this all over again. So this is the element of paranoid, or this is the element of strict application of rules, which defines the fundamentals of zero trust. And everything is driven by the strategic of the organization. And also, if you look at, this whole, the automation where they are being done, especially the usage of machine learning and the patterns they come up with, it's going to be a very, very dynamic system. It's not once installed and it's there for next few years. No, this is a self-learning, self-healing, a very, very intelligent system which is constantly monitoring and learning on its own, so that the data is secured, the people are secured, and the devices are secured. Micro-segmentation is the key. How small you can divide your organization to a level where there is a one-to-one mapping between the user and the usage is the key to success for zero trust. If you look at this way, historically, like anybody can log in with any device and still access a service, as long as they are within the particular DMZ or within a traditional environment. But today, every user has to identify themselves, including the device, including the IP address, including the geolocation. It goes through a central processing, which is the ZT, Zero Trust Network Access Controller. And it decides, which service to be allocated to you, for how long and why. So it is mediated. The entire journey is logged. And there is an engine which constantly analyzes you. Are you doing exactly what you are supposed to be doing, or you are sniffing around? That is the element of details and micromanagement zero trust architecture is able to do it. So how is the zero trust architecture implemented in any organization? First principle, assume there is a breach. Like everything is a hostile. The network is hostile, the individual is hostile, the device is hostile. External and internal threats are always there. Never assume there is no threat. It's not that, last 6 months, nothing has happened. Tomorrow, nothing is going to happen. Network locality is not necessarily enough and sufficient to protect your data and your organization. Every device, every user, every bit of data which is traversing the network has to be monitored, mediated, has to go through certain rule-based policies, has to be authenticated and authorized. The policies must be dynamic and also to be compliant to the law of the land. What works in India need not work in France, need not work in US. They might have a different rules. India could have a different rules. The data privacy could be different rules. Everything has to be dynamic and real time. So there is so much to be done. So how do you build it? I think the extremely important element is you need to divide your entire system, your data access system into these buckets or these pillars. Identify who are the users. Is a long-term user, short-term user, a transaction user, a regular user, non-regular users. It's all depend on your business. So the zero trust architecture model has to be driven by your business needs. You have to authenticate, register the devices, and the devices have to be hardened by the principles and the policies of your organization. Very simple. Like, I know organizations where they have, blocked the usage of all USB ports and external connectivity other than the LAN connectivity. I know policies or organizations where you cannot tamper with the window defender. You cannot switch off and switch on. There are organizations, they go even right up to the BIOS level and say, hey, you cannot touch the BIOS. With so many mobile devices, organizations have even hardened the mobile devices, created a virtual layer on top of it and say, you can only access these set of applications through this particular master application, and you can't switch Windows also. The moment you switch Windows, you're logged off. So, the pillars of success for zero trust architectures are defined by the users, the devices, the network, the IP address, the various applications you have access to, the amount of automation and orchestration you can build in, and deep analytics of the past and the current, so that you have visibility to the behavior of the user, especially the entity behavior, and create a pattern out of it so that your risk management framework is always live and kicking in real time. It needs a very, very strong governance and audit mechanisms also. It's not that something it is done by the set of network guys and the rest of the application stack, the user stack are not bothered about it. Because this is a close collaboration between the application developers, the network, the security, the strategy, the business users. Everybody has to sit and decide what is the risk of my business, who are the risk elements of the business, and in what way the network architecture plays in the overall risk framework of the strategy. There is a Cisco, a simplistic way, but an extremely complex way of implementing. What Cisco does is multi-factors of user identity is a must. Not just necessarily a two-factor, not just necessarily, when you log in, there's an OTP, because your device could be compromised. You are compromised. Device context and identity is also important. When I say the context, where you are, your geocentricity, your geolocation, that is also, and your IP address. So there are so many factors which define the context. Device posture and health. When was the last time the policies which are residing on your device, whether it's a mobile device or a laptop or a desktop, have been updated? When was the last signature of your antivirus and policies have been updated? Location, relevant attributes, everything is part of the identity. Similarly, you start off with the least privilege access. Everything is given on that particular moment of time. Continuous trust and verification. Just because I trusted you half an hour back, that doesn't mean that I continue the trust as long as you are logged in. The moment you log off and log in, I have to do all over again. There are varying methodologies of architectures. It all depends upon how much of your network and applications and interaction with your business is within the DMZ and how much of that is on the cloud. I still remember about a few years back, there was a lot of conversations with the CIOs and the CTOs to say, why don't you move out of your, single location data centers to cloud-based? It reduces your maintenance cost, it reduces your update cost, it reduces your licensing cost. But today, the cloud has itself become Achilles heel, and with so much of diverse locations of the applications and data, today those are the the weak points of getting hacked or getting compromised. So it's a dual-edged sword. If you want to put everything within your DMZ, that itself is a risk. If everything is cloud-based, that is also a risk. But the key thing is, how do you define your policies, and real-time orchestration of the policies is the way to your success. If you look at a classical framework, which is pretty much, I would say, the gold standard for laying out the methodology for ZTA, it's all about your strategy. It's all about the governance, roles, and responsibilities, a very, very clear and automated way of defining the roles. Say, for example, it's me. Today, I'm running a certain set of business. Tomorrow, for whatever the reason, I've been given a sort of additional responsibilities of an HR or a finance for next 1 month because my CFO has gone on leave. Will I get an immediate access to all the finance files? Answer is no. Because somewhere in the system, this transition to a new role, for how long, to what extent I have the access, to what extent I can take a decision, to what extent I can manipulate the data, is driven by the overall strategy and the business priority. So it's extremely important that the IT environment is linked with the overall strategy and the risk framework of the organization, where business assets, threats, and risks are well documented and audited and automated. The second is all about our cyber domains. How do I do my identity? How do I identify my users? How do I identify my devices? How well organized my applications are, which can be micro-segmented in a way I can really pinpoint the access control and manage it with the least risk of any threat or a breach. In terms of the transportation mechanism of data, the firewall, the switches, the network access architectures, that is the key to part of the cyber policies and the way the information is managed. Of course, there are techniques, you can enhance the governance, how deep you can go on segmentation. You can do a multi-stage network visibility where everybody gets to see nothing. You get to discover as and when on need basis. So who defines that need basis is the way the security architecture is defined. And there are policies which help you to define those roles and responsibilities. Data protection in terms of classification, encryption, the way you store data, especially when you're talking about crypto and blockchain, it makes all the more complex to manage data encryption and tokenization. So how do you protect the leak protection? How do you minimize the leak? And how do you dynamically manage the rights to read or write or modify or delete at every role and every risk possible? So it also calls for a dynamic operations. So there is the entire SOC, which is your security operations centers. Today, there's a lot more load on them to manage it automatically on the way you orchestrate the policies, dynamically implement, look at the threats proactively, and try and reduce the risks. So a typical architecture in a large organization, on one side, you have the policies on a server where you talk about the entire inventory of the people, the applications, and the devices. Then after it crosses through, there is a zero trust policy engine, which is driven by the organization policies, the security policies, the lessons learned, a lot of pattern-based using machine learning and AI-based policies, which goes to a trust engine and says that, hey, can this particular access be trusted or not? And finally, giving access dynamically to the various applications and the network components, and everything is so dynamic and real-time. That's the only way you could implement the zero trust architecture. So just quickly, I'll take an example. Somebody logs in to a system, through a multi-factor, through a location, through a geotag device which has been authenticated, validated, verified. It goes to a central mechanism after crossing the firewall. And this is where your zero trust network access engine rests. Your security policies, your, the heart and soul which defines your risk evaluation on a dynamic basis. It defines, hey, so here is a guy who is logging in from these 4 or 6 areas which are crossed through the multiple layers of validation. Is it a risk or not a risk? If it's a risk, the user is a risk or the device is a risk, throw them out, bar them. If it is cleared, depending upon at a point in time, you get access to documents, apps, data, network elements, and that is a single sign. Once you're logged off, the entire thing reports all over again, and that is for one single signal of logging in. So similar architecture using Azure. Today, Azure is pretty much, anybody who is using Microsoft Windows as their core mail system, they mostly get access to the Azure directory, Active Directory, which has replaced the DNS directory. The entire thing is happening real time. There are so many components which are running in parallel. That is going to define how much of access and how long you have an access to the system. So, the entire architecture is well defined and very well policy driven. And there are way too components out there, who can, give you targeted solutions. But this is the broad, I would say an architecture in terms of an organization which runs on Microsoft as their Active Directory. What is also extremely important to note that, not only you as a user, the device and the location is important, the context is also important. When you say a context, let's take an example of me, a Bangalore-based employee traveling for 2 days on an emergency travel to, say, to Paris. So the system still doesn't know. That means my travel system is not talking to my zero trust architecture system. So I have traveled on work. It is me, an employee for the last 20 years, a senior employee, carrying the same authenticated device. I last log in from Bangalore airport at 9 in the night. I send some approvals. Next day morning, after 10 hours, 15 hours, I land up in Paris. I connect to the hotel network. My laptop doesn't go through. I am denied access. Why? Because the context is important, which is missing in the policy. So it's important that the internal systems are also part of the policy and the context, so that the movement of the employee, which is the user, and the device, they are in sync with the policies. So what will be the reason? Okay, say for example, I land in Paris, my laptop crashes. I call up my colleague, or maybe I go to my own office in Paris, within the campus, within the hardened zone. I go to the office, I sit in front of a desktop, I log in, and I still don't get access. Because my user ID and the desktop and the IP addresses don't match, because the system doesn't know that I have traveled from Bangalore to Paris. So this orchestration is very important on a dynamic basis. And this can happen only if the network microsegmentation is so aligned with the internal systems that you are real time and the systems are as real time as you. So the key thing is how do you define the context and how do you define the business priorities in the policy so that the orchestration is seamless and the systems can run seamlessly without any impacting to the user. I mean, imagine you going to Paris for a 1-day work and half the day is gone trying to get your access back. It's a waste of time, money, energy, and at the end of the day, what are you protecting? So I think somewhere that balance between the data protection and the ease of use has to be driven. And also the technology has to simplify it. So to ask, to answer the question on how do you change the passwords, so many passwords every day, so often, the world is moving towards a passwordless world. Today, half my applications today are run without passwords. So, the technology is enabling you to get into the world of passwordless, where your identity, which is your biometric and other identities, are now become integral part of the user authentication and the device authentication. So, don't try to block the cameras and, the fingerprints on your laptops, because tomorrow, those could be your saviors, So, we are on the verge of getting into a passwordless world. And in a couple of years, we are going to be there, So security parameters are also fundamentally changing, both at the physical as well as at the entity level. Network, I think we have talked quite a bit about it. So the physical level, the devices are getting smarter. Today, I would say that there are a lot of devices coming out there which are using a lot of biometric way of authentication, and which is also linked with the security authentication of, say, for example, in US, like every time you log in, it's always, gets authenticated with the social security number. In India, it can be Aadhaar, it can be anything else, I think the physical identity clubbed with the user identity is one of the bigger challenges today. Network as a technology, it is well addressed, but I think some of these are still out there, getting it solved. So modernizing the security parameters, if you look at, the threats are constantly hitting the network, but I think if you look at the statistics or number of phishings and identity thefts, whether it's a passwords or anything getting lost, they're still there because the device and the users are still very, very sort of unsecured, even though the network is secured. So if you are having licensed versions of Office 365 or an open office or any other, licensed products, the data is now on cloud. It's no more residing on your device. So it's extremely important to redo your identity once in a while, because the system is forcing you to change passwords, recalibrate your identity. People are always, nowadays I get to see a lot more times the application asking me, is it you? They're trying to send me a lot of OTPs, a lot of authentication using a 16-character passwords. Today, if you see the password sizes have gone up from 4 to 6 to 8 to 16. There are certain critical applications where they might have to use a 32-bit passwords also. So modernizing the security parameter is a very big incentive which is happening today out in the market. Access management and also the quality of hardware, which is providing that flexibility, is today the talk of the town. So, I think more than this, perimeter, your access to application is also getting more and more stringent, but not necessarily, the normal emails. But if you look at the business, because so, I have both, I have a business ID as well as a regular ID from Gmail. But the way I log into the business ID is way too complex and way too tedious as compared to the regular Gmail. So, and it's all because it's the risk of impacting a business is very high. So the firewall, the intrusion prevention, and the way the authentication is being done is a lot more rigid there. So conditional access we have spoken about, in terms of the user, the device, and the location and the context. It is getting more and more robust now, and there are a lot of articles out there I'll be sharing where you can have, go at them if you're keen to look at it. So over a last couple of years, ever since this, the big breaches happened and the world got together in terms of securing the network, because the world has gone onto the net lot more than what it was over the last couple of decades. Last 2-3 years have been a massive flow of, logging into the net. There is a certain lexicon and dictionary which is being formalized, and most of the zero trust architecture follows certain terminologies around access policies, configuration policies, what is a signal, what is a policy engine, what is orchestration, what is an enforcement point, which is nothing but micro segmentation. And also people are talking about the it's booting up or not. It's all about getting that compliance to the certain policy standards is very important. So what can zero trust architecture do? It controls the net, it controls the access to data, it completely eliminates VPN. It improves the individual productivity because the person can get in, do the job and get out. It can constantly upgrade the policies on the fly on a dynamic basis. And both the identity of the individual as well as the data is well protected. If you look at the current state, most of the organizations still running on SSO, continuous connectivity to all the servers on the same network. There's a lot of redundant applications sitting out there. It's very, very compliance focused. Are you there? And it's very reactive unless they don't intervene, unless there is a breach. But I think sooner or later, in the next, I would say next couple of years, actually some of the organizations have already done that. Everything is cloud-based identity. Everything is brokered on a one-to-one basis, like the zero trust network access controls. It's a dynamic system. It's not just a switch. It's not just a smart switch. It's a policy engine. Your authentication to any access to data or application is just in time. It's a dynamic risk management, data provenance. You are assigned to data as and when required, and it's always monitored, moderated, and you're always analyzed. When are you logging in? What are you logging in? And sometimes it might so happen that if there are way too many deviations in your users and user IDs and authentications, you can be flagged by the system and calling them to be a risk. Unless your manager approves, you are not going to get your access back. A lot of decisions are dynamic, which is linked with the businesses, and the systems are getting a lot more integrated with a lot more analytics and AI and ML based interventions and snooping happening. Rather than being compliance focused, there will be a lot of audits and sort of a threat based adversarial testing being done, especially someone who is in the testing business or someone who is in the specialized services of on application security or network security. For me, this is big business. How do you do your network penetration test or adversarial testing using automation tools? I think that is the way the industry is moving ahead, and more complexities are going to get in with more and more mobile devices, going and hitting the net. So how do we see the desired state? What is the end state of zero trust? I think there is no end state. It's only a beginning. It's a dynamically changing framework. And, somebody was saying, is zero trust all about no trust and no trust and no trust? The answer is no. I think with the passage of time, with the passage of complexities of number of devices and network components getting integrated on the cloud, I think we are getting into a place where the trust is the biggest victim. More and more mistrust and distrust and no trust is going to hit the system, and you will be asked to prove your identity, your device identity, your location, your context more often than ever. Because the complexity of you doing businesses and the challenge and the attacks on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that is getting more and more complex nowadays. So I'm leaving behind a few reading material I think the best is the Forester's report on practical guide to zero trust implementation. There is a NIST framework on zero trust maturity model 1.0, which details in terms of what are the components which goes in defining the users, the workloads, the devices, the network, and the micro segments of data. So how do you define them? How do you monitor them? How do you write policies which can, be risk averse and which integrates with your overall strategy of your organization? So, in a very, very simplistic way, this is how ZTA architecture looks like. On the outside, you have the devices and the users. In the inside, you have the orchestration framework and the automation and the policies, which are way too micro segmented. And finally, you have the data, which is partly inside the system and partly on the cloud. It could be data center on the cloud. It could be a SaaS provider, or it could be an information or a service provider out on the cloud. But finally, it's all about integrated system where each of them are talking to each other in terms of identity and threat. So there is a maturity model, which is still evolving, but I think it's pretty much there, which clearly defines what makes a high mature zero trust installation in terms of identity, device, network, application, and data. It's your ability to define a governance structure with clear roles and responsibilities, who is responsible for what, the element and the depth of automation and orchestration in terms of how real-time they are, and the analytics which comes out of it in terms of the UBA and also the user entity management, the device management, and everything related to the analytics of it. So, these pillars are well defined and well articulated. If you are interested, I can take a different session on the maturity model for the zero trust architecture. But now I could definitely say that the pillars of identity, device, network, application, and data, they're extremely well defined and categorized. And this is how it looks like in the optimal state. Everything is automated, very well defined, very well orchestrated, and it's a self-learning mechanism. There is very, very less sort of human intervention in terms of exception management. Everything is rule-based, and the heart and soul of this optimal ZTA is all about your analytics and the way you're orchestrating the policies with the rest of the organization. So this is in brief about how a traditional setup looks like, and a very, very highly optimized and a very high mature organization looks like. You could see the transition. I think the key thing is the governance part of it. The more the governance, the higher the maturity you are. And it's all driven by your business need. You don't have to do everything the way it's to be optimized, but it has to be driven by your business needs. Even a traditional fundamentals of ZTA is good enough to cut your losses and reduce the breaches into your system. There are various tools and the products available in the market. I have listed a few of them, and there are available guidances and documents available out there, which is readily available in the public domain. There's a CSAM model, there is an NIST maturity model, there is an NSA, which is by the DoD. So there are a lot of documents and very well documented, proven, tested frameworks are available. You can pick it up, any one of them, and start implementing. Of course, this is still evolving. There's a lot to learn, but the framework is in place to take the next step. So how do you buy zero trust? You don't buy zero trust. It's not a single product, or you just buy a solution out from Cisco or anybody else. No, it is a policy. It's a way of life. It is a methodology. It's a framework, and it follows a certain methodologies like a CMM model. Can I buy a product and say, hey, I implement it and tomorrow I am CMM L5? Answer is no. It's a way of life. It's a cultural change with everybody users, the devices, the business users, the partners, the ecosystem has to start adopting to this new way of life. So there are a lot of vendors out there who are providing targeted solutions. If you look at the identity management is done by RSA, they have the Okta, they have the AWS AD. So there are a lot of products which are out there which can form an integrated solution the way you implement it. But end of the day, the framework has to be defined by the businesses. So there are a lot of use cases, simple, how many of you consume Netflix? Netflix is a hybrid combination of, completely in-house versus, completely cloud-based. So depending upon the use cases, the priority defines. In a corporate network, confidentiality is more important as a primary objective. Say, for example, in the air traffic control, it is availability of the air traffic system is more important than the rest. So, you define what is priority to you in terms of what happens in an attack, what is important for you in terms of confidentiality or integrity or availability, and you define the zero trust principles based on your priorities. So there are a lot of certifications available out there. Somebody who wants to make a career out of the zero trust architecture, the new age of network security, it's out there. A bit of it is shown here. It's a good career option. People who are in the security areas should look at it. I think one thing which I also wanted to see that as a nation, India is probably the global leader in technology and solutions. Maybe it's time to India to define its own zero trust frameworks. Now, how do you access the cloud? How do you access internet? How do you access your device? How do you trust your devices? I think most of the things we are actually depending on the West. I'm looking for a day when India defines its own zero trust framework, the way the DoD and NIST has done for the US. Some of the reading material out there, and there's a YouTube link also I'm sharing with you. Very interesting. I have gone through quite a few of them. Very, very interesting documentation, which gives you a fairly good idea where to start and how do you build your zero trust architecture and how do you define the frameworks and the principles and the policies which drive zero trust. That's pretty much from my side. Thank you. I took from 6:10 to 7:40.
Yes, sir.
I can take questions. Maybe
Thank you.
as long as you are okay with that. So, this is from my side, guys.
Thank you very much for your detailed presentation on zero trust architecture, sir. So we have few questions received from participants.
Okay.
I will read out one by one. After that, we will open the floor to the.
Yes, sir. Congratulations, sir. Thank you. Excellent presentation, sir. And very nice. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Sir, I will read out the question, sir.
Sure.
What are the latest developments on cyber security and ISO 27001?
I think the latest development on network security is the zero trust architecture. So ISO will follow later.
Okay.
If you look at ISO, they don't define standard, but they come and audit your own standards, what you have defined. I think every organization has to define its own architecture, document it, and follow it. That's where ISO will come and help you to maintain that standards and maintain that quality of compliance. Today it's still evolving, but I'm sure in a couple of years we'll come with a standardized framework on ZTA.
Okay, sir. The next question is there components of zero trust for node and network differs?
Node is for me is a micro segmentation of a network. End of the day, it all comes down to the smallest segment of what you are protecting. The smallest component of what you're protecting is the data. If you can micro segment it and protect it along the layers of users, the device, the workload, I think the node is just one component of the network.
Thank you.
It can
sir.
be a switch, the switch can be replaced with a ZTNA policy. So the nodes can be subsumed into that ZTNA architecture as long as it's serving the purpose. I think it's did it part.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, what are the tools to enable zero trust architecture for cloud?
The tools for me, I think if you go back to the presentation, I've clearly articulated about, what are the various products out in the market. I'll share the presentation with all of you. There are different targeted products out there which defines the user access, the device authentication, the device registration in terms of defining the policies. There are tools which does your analytics part of it. So the cloud is a combination of multiple tools, not just a set of tools. And different, manufacturers have different specialization, which come together to create a big solution for the cloud.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, does zero trust architecture also leads to user profiling for the ads, which in turn might be a bad?
No, I would say yes, because there is something called as, analytics of your pattern of logging in. So they may not monitor my behavior pattern in the digital twin. We are talking about a digital twin, right? When I'm talking about a digital twin, will the system with the zero trust architecture start monitoring, where all I go, what all I have consumed, what all I have bought in the digital world? Answer is no. Zero trust architecture is a very, very targeted solution and a methodology for a particular installation or for a particular enterprise. For that particular enterprise, they'll collect data, whatever is required to ensure that your access is trustworthy and you are accessing the trusted data only. You're not a threat to the organization. They don't profile you based on your personal consumption. Let me be very clear. You could be profiled based on from your logging in. Say, for example, you're always logging in from a different IP address. You can be put as a threat, because there's no consistency of your user login unless you're authorized to log in from 5 different places on 5 different days in a week, unless you are a mobile, like a sales guy. But if you are expected to be stationary logging in from a particular location and you're always logging in from a different IP addresses, yes, that will throw up a pattern and they might, tag you as a risky employee.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, which is the best protocol to find the trust-based routing?
There's no single protocol. It's all about the policies. Once you start eliminating the threat at the source, you're not too worried about, which port, which protocol, I need to worry about, because the protocols have their own, standards of protecting the intrusions and the threats. But more importantly, as a zero trust architecture, once I identify the threat at the source, I'm not too worried about the protocols. Protocols comes much later. The protocol and the ports make a lot of sense in a conventional architecture, not in a zero trust architecture.
Thank you very much, sir. The last question. Can you explain the formula for finding the trust of node?
There's no formula for it. It all depends on the history of the breaches and what has been the impact of the breach. So, if you look at a particular node, you look at the traffic and what are the applications the node is giving an access to, and how intelligent that node is and how intelligently the node is managed with a set of policies, and how much of policy-based traffic management the node is doing. If the node is just allowing a traffic to flow without even monitoring it and managing it and assuming it that the traffic is trustworthy, then the node is not an intelligent node. Today, all those nodes and switches are now replaced in a zero trust architecture through a very smart, intelligent, real-time automated ZTNA. So So that is what is going to, defines and today ZTN is going to completely eliminate the requirement of a VPN.
Yeah, that is the question asked by the participant. Does zero trust architecture really eliminates the VPN?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Today, I don't need a VPN anymore, because if I am authorized, my device is authorized, my location authorized, and I also know that I'm getting into a highly secure application. I'll give an example. Tomorrow, I'm logging into a bank network. Okay, all I'm doing is I'm going to find my account balance. If the bank already registers me as a user with a multi-factor authentication, not necessarily two-factor authentication, there's a multi-factor authentication and my device is registered with the bank, I don't see any issue why I need a VPN. Because it's me, which I am authenticated, my device is authenticated, my location is authenticated, my browser is authenticated, then why do I need a VPN then? So some of these fundamental questions are being questioned, and there are answers which are already there, which completely negates the role of a VPN.
Thank you, sir. These are some of the questions from participants.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Appreciate.
So now if any questions from participants, we can address. Otherwise, we will move on to the formal vote of thanks.
Yes, Dr. Shakti. Let's move to formal vote of thanks.
Yes, sir.
Some of us, have another meeting. We may have to join that. So,
Okay.
thank you, Dr. Shakti, for handling the questions. All others, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box or send it to csi@info.org, info@csi.org. We will definitely forward it to Dr. Rajeswar Rao, and we will get you the answers. Also, kindly provide the feedback in the link that we gave. That will help you get access to the video recording and any material that the speaker wishes to share after proper sanitization. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rajeswar Rao. It has been a wonderful day. You covered the zero trust architecture very well. You demystified the mystery around the ZTA. Right from the history, you have clearly explained what are the principles, what are the challenges, and how do we implement the ZTA, and also the examples. You have given beautiful examples all the way. So thank you very much, sir, for your detailed presentation. And I'm sure we will be in touch with you to have further webinars or any other conferences that we may have on the security aspect. So we are very proud on in collaborating with you. So on behalf of Computer Society of India, Chennai chapter, IEEE Computer Society Madras, Association for Computing Machinery, Chennai, and the Society for Electronic Transaction and Security, we would like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this excellent presentation, sir. Thank you so much. And,
it's been a great pleasure.
thank you. And we'd like to thank all the members who participated in spite of the weekend. So thank you all. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you. Good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yes, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajeswar Rao, sir. This is Babu from SETS. It's a wonderful topic.
Yeah.
Covered all aspects of zero trust architecture.
My pleasure always, sir. No, we can connect offline also.
Yeah.